My name is Samantha Miller, 32, and I've never seen my father's face turn so pale. Standing there in his expensive tuxedo at my sister Audrey's wedding reception, he looked like he'd seen a ghost when I walked in. "You're getting nothing," he hissed, pulling me aside, champagne sloshing from his glass. "I've made sure of it." I just smiled and took a sip of my own drink. If only he knew that his threat meant nothing, because I already owned everything he thought was his. The family business, the estate, even the venue where we stood. All mine. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy family drama with a satisfying twist, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of sweet justice served at just the right moment. The Miller family had always been a house divided. As the eldest daughter, I was expected to follow in my father's footsteps, but not actually succeed. James Miller, my 60-year-old father, built Miller Enterprises from scratch through ruthless determination and questionable ethics. He was the kind of man who valued loyalty above talent, which explained why my sister Audrey, 28, remained his golden child while I became the family outcast. "Samantha always thinks she knows better," my father would tell business associates at company dinners, his arm firmly around Audrey's shoulders. "But Audrey here understands what loyalty means." What he really meant was that Audrey never questioned him. She never pointed out the flaws in his business plans or suggested innovations that might threaten his ego. I, on the other hand, couldn't help myself. With an MBA from Wharton and a natural instinct for business that even my professors acknowledged surpassed my father's, I saw opportunities he missed and risks he overlooked. Every attempt to share these insights was met with dismissal, often public and always humiliating. My mother, Catherine, watched it all happen with the emotional detachment of someone who had learned long ago that intervention was futile. At 58, she had perfected the art of existing in my father's orbit without challenging his gravitational pull. Her smiles never reached her eyes during family photos, and her laughter at company parties sounded rehearsed. She was a ghost in designer clothing, haunting our family mansion but never truly living in it. "Your father means well," she would whisper to me after particularly brutal dismissals. "He just wants what's best for the company." But the company was never separate from his ego. Miller Enterprises wasn't a business, it was an extension of James Miller himself. The country club hosting Audrey's wedding to Brian Calloway was a testament to my father's obsession with appearances. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, while elaborate flower arrangements worth thousands adorned every table. The guest list included state senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, and even a minor European royal, connections my father had cultivated through decades of strategic gift-giving and favor trading. What no one in that ballroom knew, least of all my father, was that Phoenix Holdings, my company, had acquired the country club 6 months earlier through a subsidiary. The manager who had greeted James Miller so deferentially at the door reported directly to me. The wedding venue my father had chosen to flaunt his wealth was putting money directly into my pocket. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched him work the room, shaking hands and slapping backs like a politician on election day. He introduced Audrey and her new husband to everyone as the future of Miller Enterprises, while pointedly ignoring my presence. Whispers followed me as I moved through the crowd. The prodigal daughter returned after 10 years of absence, her designer dress and confident posture suggesting she hadn't exactly been suffering during her exile. I heard she started her own company. I overheard one of my father's golf buddies murmuring to another. "Some investment firm on the West Coast." "Phoenix something," his companion replied. "Doing surprisingly well, from what I hear." If they only knew. 10 years ago, I had walked out of my father's office for the last time after he had torn apart a business proposal that would have doubled the company's market share within 5 years. I'd spent months researching emerging markets, analyzing competitor weaknesses, and creating a step-by-step implementation plan. He hadn't even finished reading it before declaring it naive and impractical. That night, I packed my bags and left, taking nothing but my personal savings and a determination to prove him wrong. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd already been approached by Harold Winston, one of my father's former colleagues who had recognized my potential during a company dinner. Your father is a fool to waste your talent, he had told me, slipping me his business card. When you're ready for something better, call me. Harold became the mentor my father never was. He invested in my first ventures, introduced me to his network, and most importantly, believed in my vision. Together, we built Phoenix Investments into a force that operated in the shadows of the financial world, quietly acquiring undervalued assets and turning them into gold mines. What my father didn't know, what no one knew, was that for the past 5 years, I had been systematically acquiring controlling interests in key suppliers to Miller Enterprises. I'd purchased his debt from banks through shell companies. I'd hired executives he had fired for challenging his outdated methods. Piece by piece, I had been assembling the mechanism of his downfall, all while he continued to believe I was a non-entity in his world. And now, watching him hold court at Audrey's wedding reception, completely unaware that he was standing in a building I owned, I felt a calm certainty that justice was finally within reach. To my beautiful daughter Audrey, my father announced, raising his champagne glass high. The reception fell silent as all eyes turned to him. The true heir to the Miller legacy. The emphasis on true wasn't subtle. Several guests glanced uncomfortably in my direction, but I maintained my composure, sipping champagne at a table near the back of the room. Brian, he continued, addressing my sister's new husband, you're not just gaining a wife today. You're joining a dynasty. He chuckled, the sound hollow and practiced. Well, assuming you can keep Audrey happy enough that she doesn't divorce you and take half. The crowd laughed nervously. My father had always mistaken cruelty for humor. To the only daughter who understood the meaning of family loyalty, he concluded, his eyes finding mine across the room. And to the future of Miller Enterprises. Glasses clinked throughout the reception hall. I raised mine in acknowledgement, my smile never wavering. It didn't take long for him to corner me near the bar, his public persona slipping away like a poorly secured mask. I'm surprised you had the nerve to show up, he said, his voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear, but sharp enough to cut. Audrey invited you out of courtesy, not because anyone wanted you here. Hello to you too, Dad, I replied, signaling the bartender for another drink. Lovely ceremony. Don't get comfortable, he continued, stepping closer. You might have wormed your way back for this event, but make no mistake, you're getting nothing from me. Not a penny, not a share, nothing. I've made sure of it. The threat might have devastated me once. 10 years ago, being cut off from the family fortune had seemed like the ultimate punishment. Now, it was almost laughable. That's fine, Dad, I said, accepting my fresh glass of champagne. I've done quite well on my own. Something in my tone made him pause. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Your little investment company? He scoffed, recovering quickly. Playing with pocket change in California while I build an empire? Don't kid yourself, Samantha. I simply smiled, which seemed to infuriate him more than any retort could have. You'll never be good enough, he hissed, echoing the words that had sent me fleeing a decade earlier. You never were. Those same words had once broken me. I remembered that night with perfect clarity, standing in his office with my proposal clutched in trembling hands, watching him dismiss months of work without even properly reviewing it. This industry is changing, Dad, I had argued. Digital transformation is going to make our current model obsolete within 5 years if we don't adapt. This industry was built by men who understood respect and hierarchy, he had countered, tossing my proposal aside. Not by little girls with fancy degrees who think they know better than their fathers. I'm not trying to disrespect you, I had insisted, fighting back tears. I'm trying to help the company, our family's legacy, survive the future. He had stood then, looming over his desk. You think you're so smart? You think your professors filled your head with wisdom I don't have after 30 years in this business? Let me tell you something, Samantha. You'll never be good enough. Not for this company, not for this family. You lack the killer instinct. The irony of that accusation wasn't lost on me now, as we stood in the venue I secretly owned, with his company quietly crumbling beneath his feet. Before my father could continue his tirade, Maxwell Thornton, his current business partner, approached us. I had been waiting for this moment. James, Samantha, Maxwell greeted us with the practiced smoothness of a lifelong networker. Wonderful to see the whole family together again. My father's demeanor shifted instantly, the public mask slipping back into place. Max. Enjoying yourself? Absolutely, Maxwell replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. Though I was hoping to discuss those supply chain issues we've been having. 3 more vendors increased their rates this morning. My father's smile faltered. This is hardly the time or place, Max. Of course, Maxwell backpedaled, before turning to me. Samantha, I understand you're in investments now. Phoenix Investments, correct? Impressive growth profile. I could practically see my father's ears perk up. Thank you, I replied modestly. We focus on identifying undervalued assets with strong growth potential. Often in traditional industries ripe for modernization. Fascinating, Maxwell said, ignoring my father's growing discomfort. You know, some of your acquisitions have had quite an impact on Miller Enterprises' supply chain. Curious coincidence. The business world is smaller than it seems, I offered with a slight smile. Indeed, Maxwell agreed, studying me with new interest. James, you never mentioned your daughter had such a head for strategic positioning. My father's face had begun to redden. Samantha got lucky with a few investments. Nothing worth discussing at length. Luck is a convenient explanation for success we don't understand, I countered smoothly. Or don't want to acknowledge. Maxwell failed to suppress a smile, which only darkened my father's expression further. If you'll excuse me, my father said stiffly, I should check on Audrey. As he stalked away, Maxwell turned to me with undisguised curiosity. You know, I've been reviewing the market positions of our major suppliers. Remarkable how many have been acquired by subsidiaries of the same parent company over the past 3 years. I sipped my champagne. Vertical integration is a powerful strategy when executed properly. And when the intention is to control rather than merely integrate, he asked pointedly. Then it becomes a lesson in paying attention to the details of one's business relationships, I replied. Something my father never excelled at. Maxwell studied me for a long moment. He doesn't know, does he? Not yet, I admitted. But he will soon enough. I found Audrey alone on the venue's terrace, seeking a moment's respite from the reception's chaos. In her wedding gown, with the evening light casting a golden glow on her features, she looked like a princess from a fairy tale, beautiful, perfect, and trapped. Hiding from your own wedding? I asked, joining her at the stone balustrade. She startled slightly, then relaxed when she saw it was me. Just needed some air. It's exhausting being the center of attention. I imagine it's exhausting being Dad's favorite, too, I said, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a statement years ago. Audrey's smile faltered. Is that what you think? That I'm the lucky one? The question hung between us, laden with a decade of separate experiences and divergent paths. Aren't you? I asked softly. The devoted daughter who did everything right? She laughed, but the sound held no joy. I did everything he wanted. That's not the same thing. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Despite sharing childhood bedrooms and secrets, we had become strangers connected only by blood and shared history. I've always admired you, Sam, Audrey finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even when Dad was at his worst after you left, part of me was cheering for you. You had the courage to walk away. It didn't feel like courage at the time, I admitted. It felt like failure. At least you chose your own path. Look at me, married to Brian because his family's shipping business complements Dad's manufacturing interests. She twisted her new wedding ring absently. The perfect merger, disguised as a love match. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. You don't love Brian? I care for him, she said carefully. He's kind and handsome, and he tries to make me happy. But we both know why Dad pushed us together 3 years ago. The weight of being the good daughter had etched lines around my sister's eyes that no amount of expensive makeup could fully conceal. For the first time, I saw clearly the price she had paid for our father's approval, a currency that had always been overvalued and perpetually devalued. "Do you remember that summer at Lake Geneva?" I asked, changing the subject to a happier memory. "When Dad was furious because we took the boat out without permission." Audrey's expression softened. "You told him it was your idea, even though it was mine." "You were 12, I said, smiling at the memory. "Too young to face the full force of Dad's temper." "You were always protecting me," she said, her eyes glistening. "Until you left." The unspoken accusation hung between us. I had escaped, but I had also abandoned her. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "I thought you were happy here, living the life Dad wanted for us. I never considered you might feel as trapped as I did." "Mom certainly never helped," Audrey said, a rare note of bitterness in her voice. "She just retreated further into her pills and charity committees." Our mother's emotional absence had been another constant in our childhood. Samantha Miller had perfected the art of being physically present while emotionally miles away, a survival mechanism in a marriage dominated by our father's outsized personality and volatile temper. "We made a pact once," I reminded her. "Do you remember? We carved our initials into that big oak tree by the pool house. Sisters forever, no matter what," Audrey recited, the childhood promise bringing a genuine smile to her face. "We swore to always look out for each other." "I broke that promise when I left," I acknowledged. "But I'm keeping it now." She looked at me quizzically. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, deciding how much to reveal. "Things are going to change soon, Audrey. For all of us, but especially for Dad." "What have you done?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper despite the empty terrace. "What he taught me to do," I replied. "I built something of my own. Something bigger than he could imagine." I explained enough for her to understand: Phoenix Investments, my strategic acquisitions, the gradually tightening noose around Miller Enterprises. I watched her expression shift from confusion to shock to a complex mixture of admiration and fear. "He'll be destroyed," she whispered when I finished. "Financially?" "Yes," I admitted. "His empire will crumble. But I've made provisions for you, for Mom, even for Brian. You won't suffer for his mistakes." "It's not the money I'm worried about," Audrey said. "It's him. Dad's whole identity is Miller Enterprises. Without it, who is he?" It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider, too focused on the justice of my plan to contemplate its full human cost. "Maybe he'll finally have to find out," I said. "Maybe we all will." Audrey was quiet for a long moment. "When we were little, you told me that being sisters meant having someone who knew all your secrets and loved you anyway." She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I've missed having that." "Me too," I admitted, blinking back unexpected tears. "Whatever happens with Dad, with the company, I want us to be sisters again," she said. "Real sisters, not just at holidays and weddings." The sincerity in her voice broke through barriers I'd built over a decade of estrangement. In that moment, despite our different paths and the chasm of experiences between us, we were just Sam and Audrey again, two sisters against the world. "I'd like that," I said, returning her grip. "And Audrey? If you ever want out, from Dad's control, from this life he's designed for you, just say the word. I can help you build something that's truly yours." For the first time that day, my sister's smile reached her eyes. "I might just take you up on that." Phoenix Investments hadn't been built overnight. After leaving home with nothing but my savings and a point to prove, I had spent 6 months living in a studio apartment in San Francisco, networking relentlessly and developing my business plan. Harold Winston's mentorship had been invaluable, but the company's success stemmed from my own vision, identifying traditional industries resistant to change and bringing them into the modern era. "The problem with old money," I explained to my first team of analysts, "is that it thinks like old money. It sees technology as a threat rather than an opportunity. That's our advantage. We started small, a struggling printing company that I transformed into a digital marketing powerhouse, a family-owned furniture manufacturer that we retooled for custom online orders with rapid fulfillment. Each success brought more capital, more investors, more opportunities. By year 3, Phoenix was managing assets worth over $100 million. By year 5, we crossed the billion-dollar threshold. What no one outside my inner circle knew was that every acquisition, every investment, followed a deliberate pattern. I was building a web around Miller Enterprises, positioning Phoenix as the silent controller of its supply chain. The key suppliers of raw materials, the logistics companies that transported their products, even the commercial real estate where many of their operations were housed, all gradually came under my control through an intricate network of subsidiaries and shell companies. "Your father made a critical mistake," Harold told me during one of our strategy sessions. "He built an empire on relationships rather than contracts. He assumed loyalty would protect him." Harold Winston knew my father's weaknesses intimately. They had been partners once, 3 decades earlier, before James Miller orchestrated a boardroom coup that pushed Harold out of their joint venture. The official story was that Harold had wanted to take the company in an unsustainable direction. The truth, which Harold shared with me over late-night whiskeys, was that my father had stolen his partner's ideas, presented them as his own, then used the resulting success to justify consolidating power. "He didn't just steal my company," Harold explained, the old wound still evident in his voice. "He stole my future. And then he had the audacity to tell everyone I wasn't good enough to see where the industry was headed." The parallels to my own experience were unmistakable. My father had a pattern of discarding people whose talents threatened to overshadow his own, then rewriting history to justify his actions. Harold became more than a mentor, he was the father figure I had always craved. When I doubted myself, he restored my confidence. When I achieved success, he celebrated without jealousy or conditions. He taught me not just business strategy but business ethics. How to be ruthless without being cruel, how to win without destroying. "There's a difference between revenge and justice," he often reminded me. "Revenge consumes you. Justice restores balance." I kept this distinction at the center of my plan. The goal wasn't simply to hurt my father, but to create something better from the ruins of his empire. Phoenix wasn't named randomly, it symbolized my intention to build something new and vibrant from the ashes of Miller Enterprises. The execution required patience and precision. Rather than attacking Miller Enterprises directly, I created pressure points throughout its ecosystem. When my father sought financing for expansion, he found banks suddenly hesitant, their risk departments citing concerns about market stability in his sector. When he tried to negotiate better terms with suppliers, they held firm, protected by the financial security Phoenix provided behind the scenes. My father's business model had always relied on leveraging debt to fuel growth, a strategy that worked well in expanding markets but created vulnerability during contractions. As Phoenix quietly acquired his debt from various lenders, we gained the power to call in those loans simultaneously, creating a liquidity crisis he couldn't possibly navigate. The legal framework was just as meticulously constructed. I hired the best corporate attorneys to ensure every acquisition, every contract, every maneuver was technically legal. We operated in the gray areas of business law but never crossed into illegality. If my father chose to fight in court, he would find no easy victories. "The documents are ready," my chief legal officer had confirmed 2 weeks before Audrey's wedding. "Once you give the word, we can execute the final phase within 24 hours. I had timed it perfectly. The wedding would serve as both symbolic setting and practical opportunity. All the key players would be present, distracted by celebration, guards lowered by alcohol and sentimentality. My father would be at his most vulnerable, his most arrogant, surrounded by the very people whose opinions he valued most. Justice, I had learned, was not just about consequences. It was about awareness, ensuring the perpetrator understood exactly why they were facing judgment. I wanted my father to know that his downfall came not from external forces or bad luck, but from his own actions, his own failures, his own blindness to the talent he had dismissed. Remember, Harold had cautioned before I left for the wedding, the goal isn't to become him. The moment this becomes about your ego rather than principle, you've lost regardless of the outcome. I carried this warning with me as I navigated the reception, watching my elaborate plan begin its final countdown. Years of preparation were culminating in this moment, in this opulent venue that symbolized both my father's excess and my silent power. The irony was almost poetic. I found my mother alone in the bridal suite, rearranging flower displays that were already perfect. Catherine Miller had always found comfort in fixing things that weren't broken, perhaps because the truly broken elements of her life seemed beyond repair. "Samantha," she said, startled by my appearance. "I thought everyone was at the reception." "I needed a break from Dad's performance," I replied, closing the door behind me. "And I wanted to talk to you. Alone." She nodded, understanding immediately. My mother had perfected the art of reading rooms and moods, a survival skill in a household dominated by my father's volatile temperament. "He's always worse at public events," she acknowledged, her fingers still fidgeting with rose petals. "The audience brings out his theatrical side." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," I said, taking a seat on the plush ottoman beside her. "Most people would call it being an egomaniacal bully." My mother winced but didn't contradict me. The silence between us expanded, filled with decades of unspoken truths. "Why did you stay with him?" I finally asked, the question that had haunted me since childhood. "All these years, all his cruelty, why did you endure it?" She set down the flowers, her hands suddenly still. "Do you think I had a choice?" "There's always a choice, Mom." "Is there?" Her voice had an edge I'd rarely heard. "When I married your father, I was 22 with an art history degree and no work experience. By 30, I had 2 children and a husband who controlled every aspect of our financial life. What choice did you imagine I had?" The bitterness in her tone startled me. My mother had always been the peacemaker, the soft counterpoint to my father's hardness. This glimpse of her suppressed anger was like discovering a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I've watched him," she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "For 36 years, I've watched him destroy people who challenged him, who threatened his ego. I watched what he did to Harold Winston, to dozens of employees who dared to question his decisions, and yes, to you." Her eyes met mine, suddenly fierce. "Do you think I didn't know? Do you think I didn't see his cruelty? Then why didn't you stop him?" The child in me still wanted this answer, needed it. "Because surviving him became my full-time occupation," she replied simply. "Because protecting you girls as much as I could took everything I had. Because by the time I realized what kind of man I'd married, the trap had already closed." I thought of all the times she had intervened subtly, suggesting I present certain ideas when my father was in a good mood, warning me away from topics that would trigger his temper, creating small buffers between his rage and her daughters. They had seemed like small gestures then, almost cowardly in their caution. Now I wondered if they represented a different kind of courage, the persistent, unglamorous courage of someone fighting a war they knew they couldn't win but refused to surrender. "I failed you," she acknowledged, tears finally breaching her perfect composure. "I know that. I should have been stronger. I should have taken you girls and left when you were small. But fear is persuasive. And your father made sure I understood exactly what would happen if I tried." The admission hung between us, heavy with decades of silent suffering. "I don't blame you anymore," I said quietly. "I used to, but I don't now." She looked up, surprise visible through her tears. "When did that change?" "When I built my own life. When I realized how hard it is to break free from patterns you've been trained to accept." I reached for her hand. "And when I understood that we all fight with the weapons we have. Yours were different from mine, but you were fighting all the same." Something shifted in her expression, a burden lifting, if only slightly. For perhaps the first time, we were seeing each other clearly, without the distortions of my father's influence between us. There's something else you should know, she said, glancing toward the door as if worried about eavesdroppers despite our privacy. I've been helping you. Helping me? I echoed, confused. With Phoenix. With your acquisition strategy. The statement was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't process it. What are you talking about? Who do you think leaked the information about the Westridge contract vulnerabilities? Or the details of the offshore accounts your father uses to hide assets from tax authorities? My mind raced, connecting dots that had previously seemed like lucky breaks or coincidences. Anonymous tips that had accelerated my timeline, insider information that had given Phoenix crucial advantages in negotiations. That was you? I whispered, astonished. She nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips. I've attended every board meeting as James Miller's wife for 3 decades. I've hosted dinner parties where executives speak freely, assuming I'm too decorative to understand business. I've been invisible in plain sight, which makes me the perfect spy. The revelation transformed my understanding of not just the past several years, but my entire childhood. My mother had never been the passive victim I had imagined, but a silent resistor, working within the constraints of her circumstances to undermine the man who controlled her life. The board meeting minutes, the private financial statements, the contact information for disgruntled former executives, that folder that appeared in your Phoenix office 3 years ago, she continued. Did you never wonder how those documents found their way to you? I had attributed it to Harold's connections, never imagining my mother could have orchestrated such a delivery. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Plausible deniability, she replied with surprising pragmatism. If your father ever discovered my involvement, I needed you to be able to honestly deny knowing about it. This strategic thinking, this careful calculation of risks and contingencies, it was so at odds with the fragile, decorative mother figure I had carried in my mind. I underestimated you, I admitted. All these years. Most people do, she said, and for a brief moment I glimpsed the woman she might have been without my father's shadow looming over her life. It's both a burden and an advantage. What happens after? I asked. When this is over, when Dad loses everything, what do you want? She considered the question as if no one had ever asked her about her own desires before. Perhaps no one had. Freedom, she said finally. Not revenge, not wealth, just the freedom to discover who I might be without him defining my existence. I squeezed her hand. I can give you that. I've made provisions, accounts in your name only, property that can't be touched by any fallout from Dad's collapse. I know, she said, surprising me again. I found the trust documents in your office during Thanksgiving. Very thorough. I laughed despite myself. Is there anything you don't know about? Your father's impending downfall, she replied with grim satisfaction. That will be a genuine surprise for him, though not for me. As we rejoined the reception separately to avoid suspicion, I carried with me a new understanding of my mother, not as a victim or accomplice, but as a survivor who had found her own path to resistance. In her quiet way, she had been fighting the same battle I had waged more openly, and perhaps with equal courage. Maxwell Thornton's warning reached my father during the cutting of the wedding cake. I watched from across the room as his business partner pulled him aside, speaking urgently in his ear. Even from a distance, I could track the transformation of my father's expression, from annoyed interruption to confusion, then disbelief, and finally the dawning horror of realization. His eyes found me across the crowded reception, sudden understanding replacing his usual dismissive glance. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's face as he looked at me. The cake cutting continued, with Audrey and Brian playing their parts perfectly, feeding each other bites of expensive fondant while photographers captured the moment. My father, however, had pulled out his phone and stepped away from the celebration, making call after call with increasing urgency. I intercepted Maxwell on his way to the bar. What did you tell him? The business partner shrugged, a man who recognized changing power dynamics when he saw them. Just that 3 major banks called in their loans simultaneously this afternoon. And that the name Phoenix Investments kept coming up in explanations. It was happening faster than I had anticipated. The trigger had been pulled, and the carefully arranged dominoes of my father's empire were beginning to fall. Interesting timing, I observed casually. Quite, Maxwell agreed, studying me with new respect. Your father underestimated you rather severely, it seems. A family tradition, I replied. My father's unraveling continued throughout the reception. His tuxedo jacket came off, his tie loosened, his carefully coiffed hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. The contrast between the joyous celebration and his private panic created a surreal dissonance that few guests seemed to notice but that I observed with clinical detachment. The public scene occurred approximately an hour after Maxwell's warning. My father, several drinks past his usual limit and abandoning all pretense of celebration, approached me where I stood chatting with distant cousins. What have you done? He demanded, his voice loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. Dad, I said calmly, this isn't the time or place. We can discuss business matters tomorrow. Tomorrow? He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. There might not be a company left tomorrow. Phoenix Investments, that's you, isn't it? You're behind all of this. The cousins excused themselves hastily, leaving me alone with my father's growing rage. Behind what, exactly? I asked, maintaining my composure despite the scene he was creating. Don't play innocent, he hissed. The loans, the supplier contracts, the property leases, all being called in or cancelled simultaneously. You engineered this. Sounds like serious business problems, I observed. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? To hide what you've done? His voice rose further. My own daughter, trying to destroy me. Guests were openly staring now. From across the room, I saw Audrey moving toward us, concern etched on her face. My mother wasn't far behind. Dad, you're making a scene at Audrey's wedding, I said quietly. Think about that. You never cared about this family, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. You only cared about your precious ego, your need to prove you were smarter than everyone else. The irony of this accusation was so profound that I almost laughed. Before I could respond, Audrey reached us, placing herself physically between our father and me. Dad, stop it, she said firmly. You're embarrassing yourself. Stay out of this, Audrey, he snapped. You don't understand what's happening. I understand you're ruining my wedding reception, she countered, a steel in her voice I'd never heard before. Whatever business problem you're having can wait until tomorrow. Our father looked stunned at this resistance from his traditionally compliant daughter. She's trying to take everything, he insisted, gesturing wildly at me. Everything I built, everything that should be yours someday. It's my wedding day, Audrey replied evenly. Right now, I don't care. The simplicity of her statement seemed to deflate him momentarily. In that pause, my mother appeared at his elbow. James, she said quietly but firmly, you need to step outside and collect yourself. Now. Something in her tone, perhaps its unusual authority, penetrated his rage. He allowed her to guide him toward the terrace doors, though not without a parting glare in my direction. This isn't over, he promised. Actually, I replied softly, it is. The confrontation I had anticipated for years finally occurred in the venue's wood-paneled library, a quiet sanctuary from the reception's ongoing festivities. My father, my mother, Audrey, and I gathered in this neutral territory for the reckoning that had been a decade in the making. Explain yourself, my father demanded the moment the door closed behind us. Which part would you like me to explain? I asked, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. How I built Phoenix Investments into a multi-billion-dollar company while you dismissed me as playing with pocket change. How I systematically acquired control of your supply chain, your debt, and your distribution channels? Or perhaps how I engineered today's coordinated financial attack on Miller Enterprises? His face paled with each question. This is illegal. Corporate sabotage, insider trading. Every acquisition, every contract, every maneuver was entirely legal, I interrupted. My attorneys made certain of it. You can try to fight this in court, but you'll lose, and expose even more of your own questionable business practices in the process. I removed a folder from my purse and placed it on the coffee table between us. This contains documentation proving Phoenix Investments' controlling interest in Miller Enterprises and its key subsidiaries. As of close of business today, I own 58% of your company's debt and hold majority stakes in your 7 largest suppliers. The banks have called in loans totaling $342 million, due within 30 days. Your credit lines have been frozen. Your options are bankruptcy or negotiation with me. The comprehensive nature of my takeover seemed to finally register. My father sank into a chair, his face ashen. 10 years, he murmured. You spent 10 years planning this revenge. Not revenge, I corrected. Reclamation. You built your empire on stolen ideas and discarded people. I'm simply creating something better from its foundations. You're just like me, he said, a desperate attempt to regain some control of the narrative. No, I replied firmly. I'm what you could have been if you'd valued people over power. If you'd recognized that true leadership isn't about dominance but about vision. He looked at me then, really looked at me perhaps for the first time. In his eyes, I saw the dawning recognition that the daughter he had dismissed had not only matched him but surpassed him, not by adopting his methods but by transcending them. What do you want? He finally asked, the question of a defeated man. A complete restructuring of Miller Enterprises under Phoenix management, I stated. You'll retire with a reasonable pension and consulting role, but no executive authority. The Miller name remains on the company, but the Phoenix rises above it. Audrey, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. And what about me? Where do I fit in your grand plan? That's entirely your choice, I told her sincerely. You can walk away with a generous settlement, or you can take a meaningful role in the new organization. One based on your abilities, not your willingness to echo Dad's opinions. Either way, your future is secure. My father looked between us, realization dawning that his carefully constructed dynasty was being dismantled and rebuilt before his eyes. And if I refuse? Then Phoenix proceeds with the hostile takeover already in motion, I said simply. The result will be the same, but with more public humiliation for you and greater disruption for everyone who works for Miller Enterprises. In that moment, James Miller finally understood the completeness of his defeat. The empire he had built through force of will and ruthless determination would continue, but he would no longer control it. The daughter he had dismissed as inadequate had orchestrated his downfall using the very skills he had refused to recognize. You'll ruin everything, he said, one final attempt to assert his relevance. No, Dad, I replied gently. I'll fix everything. There's a difference. The morning after Audrey's wedding dawned with a clarity that seemed symbolic. As promised, I had given my father 24 hours to consider his options before the Phoenix takeover became public knowledge. Those hours had transformed the family dynamics in ways none of us could have fully anticipated. Audrey found me at breakfast in the hotel restaurant, sliding into the seat across from me with newfound determination in her eyes. I'd been thinking about your offer, she said without preamble. A role in the new organization. I set down my coffee cup. And? I want marketing, she stated. I have a degree in it that Dad never let me use because he thought it was beneath the Miller name to sell anything. We were supposed to be so superior that clients came to us. The revelation surprised me. I had assumed Audrey's business degree had been in finance or management, tracks our father would have approved. He made me switch my concentration to general management in my junior year, she explained, reading my expression. But my best grades, my real talent, was always in brand development and marketing strategy. Marketing is yours if you want it, I agreed immediately. Full department control, VP title, appropriate compensation. And Brian? She asked. If his shipping expertise is genuine and not just a product of his family connections, there's a place for him too, I assured her. Meritocracy will be the foundation of the new company culture. She nodded, satisfaction evident in her posture. I told him everything last night. About Dad, about Phoenix, about your offer. And? I prompted when she didn't immediately continue. He said he's been waiting years for someone to challenge Dad's outdated business model. A small smile played at her lips. Apparently, he has quite a few ideas he's never been allowed to implement. It occurred to me that perhaps Brian and Audrey's marriage wasn't the purely strategic union our father had engineered. Perhaps they had found genuine connection in their shared frustration with his limitations. I want to be part of building something better, Audrey continued. Not just because it's the family business, but because for the first time it could actually be worth building. Her words resonated with the vision I had carried through years of careful planning. Miller Enterprises had always had potential beyond what our father could imagine, potential that could be unlocked by fresh perspectives and modern approaches. There's something else, Audrey added, her voice dropping slightly. Dad's not at breakfast because he's meeting with his lawyers. He thinks he can fight this. I wasn't surprised. James Miller had never accepted defeat gracefully. His lawyers will tell him what mine already have, that everything Phoenix has done is legally sound. He has no viable path to challenge the takeover. It's not just about the legal challenge, Audrey hesitated. He's been on the phone all morning with board members, executives, anyone who might help him retain control. He's telling them you've orchestrated a daughter's revenge, that you'll destroy the company out of spite. Also predictable, I acknowledged. But ultimately ineffective. The numbers speak for themselves. Miller Enterprises has been stagnating for years while Phoenix has demonstrated consistent growth and innovation. The board will follow the money, not the sentiment. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Maxwell Thornton, board members receiving calls from your father. Need unified response. Lunch today? I showed the message to Audrey. The realignment is already happening. People are choosing sides. And most will choose the side that offers a future rather than just a past, she observed astutely. Our mother joined us then, looking more rested than I had seen her in years despite the emotional turmoil of the previous day. Your father spent the night in the hotel bar, she informed us, taking a seat. He's meeting with Sanders and Whitman now. Sanders and Whitman were the family's longtime attorneys, men who had facilitated my father's business maneuvers for decades. They'll advise him to negotiate rather than fight, I predicted. They're too smart not to recognize the strength of Phoenix's position. They might, my mother agreed, but he won't listen. James has never accepted limits from anyone, least of all his own attorneys. She was right, of course. Our father's defining characteristic had always been his refusal to acknowledge boundaries, legal, ethical, or personal. There's something you should both know, my mother continued, glancing around to ensure our privacy despite the nearly empty restaurant. Your father's business practices haven't always been as legitimate as he claims. We know, Mom, Audrey said gently. The creative accounting, the pressure tactics with suppliers, the rumors about bribed inspectors, none of that is actually secret. It goes deeper than that, my mother insisted. There were partnerships dissolved under suspicious circumstances, competitors who faced anonymous regulatory investigations after refusing to sell to him, environmental violations covered up through political donations. The specificity of these allegations suggested first-hand knowledge rather than general awareness. How do you know all this? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Because I've been documenting it for years, she replied simply. Insurance, I called it, protection against the day he decided I had outlived my usefulness as the perfect corporate wife. Audrey and I exchanged glances, both recalibrating our understanding of the woman who had raised us. A woman who had observed and recorded far more than her seemingly passive demeanor had suggested. Does he know you have this documentation? Audrey asked. Not yet, our mother replied with a hint of satisfaction. But he will if he forces this into a legal battle. I've instructed my personal attorney to inform his legal team that I'm prepared to testify if necessary. The three of us sat in momentary silence, absorbing the significance of this development. The family dynamics had shifted fundamentally, no longer a patriarchy with satellites orbiting a powerful center, but a new alignment with balanced forces and shared purpose. We could destroy him completely, I acknowledged. Between Phoenix's financial leverage and Mom's documentation, he'd face not just bankruptcy but potentially criminal charges. Is that what you want? Audrey asked, studying me carefully. I considered the question honestly. No, I finally decided. That was never the goal. I wanted justice, not annihilation. I wanted to reclaim what he took from us, our confidence, our agency, our potential, not to become what he was. Then what happens next? My mother asked. We offer him a path to a dignified exit, I proposed. A consulting role with no actual authority, a reasonable income that maintains his lifestyle without control of company assets, and most importantly, the public narrative that he's choosing to step back rather than being forced out. His ego will hate it, Audrey pointed out. His ego will hate bankruptcy and potential prosecution more, my mother countered pragmatically. It's the difference between revenge and reformation, I explained. I don't need to destroy him to fix what he broke. The company, our family relationships, our individual potentials, all of that can be reclaimed without reducing him to nothing. My mother reached across the table, taking one of my hands and one of Audrey's. When did my daughters become so wise? She asked, pride evident in her voice. When we had to be, Audrey replied simply. As we finished breakfast, making plans for the coming transition, I realized that the true success of my long campaign wasn't measured in financial statements or ownership percentages. It was in this moment, three women reclaiming their power, redefining their relationships, and rebuilding something that had been broken long before I left home 10 years ago. The Miller family business would continue, but the Miller family itself was being restructured into something healthier and more balanced than it had ever been under my father's control. That transformation, more than any business takeover, represented the true victory. 2 weeks after Audrey's wedding, the business world awoke to breaking news. Phoenix Investments acquires controlling interest in Miller Enterprises, announces modernization initiative. The press release detailed a strategic partnership that would leverage the strengths of both organizations while positioning the combined entity for future growth. The carefully crafted language made no mention of hostile takeovers or family drama. To the outside world, it appeared to be a straightforward business transaction, remarkable for its scale but not for any personal dynamics behind it. I sat in what had been my father's corner office, watching the financial news coverage on a wall-mounted screen. The analysts were already speculating about what the merger would mean for the industry, most noting that Phoenix's track record of modernizing traditional businesses suggested positive outcomes for Miller Enterprises stakeholders. Stock is up 12% on the announcement, Audrey observed, entering without knocking. The formal barriers between us had dissolved over the past 2 weeks, replaced by the easy familiarity of sisters who had finally found common ground. The market recognizes potential when it sees it, I replied. They know Miller has been underperforming for years. Marketing team is assembled for the preliminary briefing, she informed me, taking a seat across from the massive desk. Brian's joining from shipping to discuss supply chain integration. The rapid reorganization had revealed surprising talents within both companies. Employees who had been stifled under my father's rigid hierarchy were flourishing with new opportunities to contribute ideas. The culture shift was palpable, from fear-based compliance to innovation-driven collaboration. And Dad? I asked, the question that inevitably arose in our conversations. Still at home, Audrey reported. Mom says he spends most days in his study, ostensibly reviewing the consulting agreement but actually just. She trailed off, uncertain how to characterize our father's retreat from the company that had defined his identity for decades. Mourning, I suggested. He's grieving the loss of control. My father had ultimately accepted the settlement offer, a generous consulting retainer, continued use of certain company perks like the car and club memberships, and most importantly, the public narrative that he was stepping back voluntarily to focus on strategic advisory roles and personal interests. The reality, of course, was quite different. After his attorneys confirmed that Phoenix's position was legally unassailable and my mother made clear her willingness to testify about past improprieties, he had capitulated with surprising speed. The fight seemed to go out of him all at once, as if the weight of decades of dominating others had suddenly become too heavy to bear. Will he ever come back to the office? Audrey wondered. Eventually, I predicted. His ego won't let him stay away forever. But when he does return, it will be to a company transformed beyond his recognition. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Harold Winston, who had played such a crucial role in my journey from disinherited daughter to corporate leader. The board approved the transition plan unanimously, he announced without preamble. Even your father's most loyal supporters recognized the writing on the wall. Harold had emerged from the shadows during the final negotiations, his presence at Phoenix finally revealed to the business world. The symmetry was perfect, the partner my father had discarded decades ago returning as an architect of his professional decline. Poetic justice, I observed. Justice, yes, Harold agreed. Though I take no joy in another man's fall, even when deserved. His words reminded me of the distinction he had emphasized throughout our years working together, between revenge, which destroyed, and justice, which restored balance. Looking around at the office that had once symbolized my father's absolute authority, now transformed into the headquarters of a more equitable enterprise, I felt the truth of that distinction. We're announcing the leadership team today, I informed him. You as Chairman Emeritus, me as CEO, Audrey as Chief Marketing Officer, and a blend of Phoenix and Miller executives in other key positions. A true merger rather than a conquest, Harold noted approvingly. Smart business and good ethics. The television screen shifted to a new segment, an interview with my father recorded the previous day at our family home. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not just by the circumstances but by the revelation of his own limitations. It's time for new leadership, he told the interviewer with practiced dignity. I built Miller Enterprises into an industry leader, and now I'm entrusting its future to the next generation. My daughter Samantha has demonstrated remarkable business acumen with Phoenix Investments, and I'm proud to see her take the helm of our family legacy. The words were right, the delivery almost convincing, but I could see what others might miss, the tightness around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he swallowed hard after mentioning my name. This was not a voluntary transition but a carefully managed surrender. Do you think he means any of it? Audrey asked quietly. No, I replied honestly. But someday, he might. Later that afternoon, I visited the empty wedding venue, the country club that had hosted Audrey's celebration and my father's downfall. The staff welcomed me as the owner rather than a guest now, no pretense necessary. Standing on the same terrace where Audrey and I had reconnected, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 10 years of determined work, of strategic planning, of patience and persistence. All leading not just to professional triumph but to personal reclamation. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Harold Winston was your father's original partner, wasn't he? The one he forced out in the early days? I smiled at her perceptiveness. Even now, she was connecting dots, seeing patterns others missed. Yes, I confirmed. Why do you ask? Just completing the picture, she replied. The circle coming around. The circle indeed. My father had built his empire by discarding people who threatened his supremacy, Harold Winston, countless executives who challenged his vision, and ultimately his own daughter. Now those same discarded pieces had reassembled into something stronger than what he had built, something that would endure because it was founded on collaboration rather than control. As I prepared to leave the venue, a staff member approached with an envelope. Your father left this for you after the wedding, Ms. Miller. He asked that it be delivered once the business transition was complete. Inside was a single sheet of company letterhead with 5 words written in my father's distinctive handwriting, "You were good enough after all." The acknowledgement, reluctant, minimal, but real, represented not victory but possibility. Not the end of a battle, but perhaps the beginning of a different relationship. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket. The past could not be changed, but the future remained unwritten. The company would move forward under new leadership, the family would heal under new dynamics, and even my father might eventually find a way to contribute positively to the legacy he had created. The true measure of success wasn't in defeating him but in transcending him, building something better than he could have imagined, something that served more than a single ego. As I drove away from the venue, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with restoration. The daughter who wasn't good enough had reclaimed not just a business empire but her own narrative, and in doing so, had created space for her sister and mother to reclaim theirs as well. The justice I had sought for 10 years turned out to be not just about correcting past wrongs but about creating future possibilities. Not just about what my father had lost, but about what we had all gained. What did you think of this family drama? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of long-awaited justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of empowerment and transformation. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's moving forward and building something better. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to reclaim your own power.